For Georgia Now News, I'm Jenna Eason. Today, Georgia lawmakers head to the state capitol for a special session that will likely shape how votes are counted in the upcoming elections and the state's political map. Kemp called the session for legislators to consider redrawing district maps ahead of the 2028 election cycle after the U.S. Supreme Court essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act. However, the session was likely to be called anyway to address a July 1st deadline that requires the elimination of QR codes on Georgia ballots. Measures to deal with the looming deadline failed to pass during the 2026 legislative session, and state election officials have given conflicting guidance as to how localities should comply with the law. In addition, Kemp recently amended his proclamation for the special session to include language that will allow lawmakers to consider adding local referendums on the November ballot to create homestead tax exemptions. Although redistricting will likely dominate the political debate, lawmakers will have plenty to discuss when they reconvene today. A national survey found that many people with depression or anxiety would feel more confident with a personalized mental health plan instead of a one-size-fits-all approach. Crystal Nelson is a board-certified psychiatrist in Noonan. She says treatment does not have to work that way, especially when using pharmacogenetic testing. Nelson has been using the testing for 11 years.
It was a simple cheek swab test that any clinician can order on their patient, and it will give them some information back telling them how the patient's genes could impact the outcomes to the medications.
NAMI Georgia reports that the state has 1.8 million adults who struggle with a mental health condition, which is a 31% increase since 2023. Nelson says genetic testing helps narrow down the list of 60 potential medications to as few as 3, depending on the results. One of Nelson's patients had tried multiple medications without success.
She was on medications that were not working. And when we did the gene site test, it suggested some medications that I would have never gone to. And I put the lady on this medication and she went into remission on a very low dose. I was able to take her from 2 medications down to 1.
Critics say the evidence for genetic testing is still developing and changing, but a 2025 study showed promising results. The study found that testing improved symptom-free remission by 41%. Nelson encourages patients to ask their providers about testing. WABE reports that after several violent incidents on the MARTA system, Georgia leaders are responding to the increase in violence. Republican State Senate Majority Leader Jason Anavitarte and Republican House Majority Leader Chuck Efstration sent a letter to MARTA's leadership asking about specific steps the agency is taking to address violence, especially ahead of the World Cup. Anavitarte expressed his concerns.
A lot of what we've seen with MARTA is happening at a pretty bad time with the World Cup literally starting days from now. So we look forward to working with MARTA to hopefully get to a better place and working even with the city of Atlanta and other leaders in the region. This is a MARTA problem. This isn't necessarily an Atlanta problem.
Governor Brian Kemp says the state is willing to help if needed, and that could include the use of the National Guard and state law enforcement on MARTA. The Federal Transit Administration has opened an investigation into MARTA's security spending, safety protocols, and risks to riders and workers. A federal judge has issued a letter of apology to a former law clerk for her harmful, offensive, and unprofessional behavior. U.S. District Judge Eleanor Ross was disciplined after an investigation found that she had sex with a police officer in her chambers within earshot of staff, attended a partisan event, and initially lied when confronted with the allegations. Ross was nominated to the bench in the Northern District of Georgia in 2014 by then-President Barack Obama. That's what's happening in Georgia now. For news anytime, check out our website at heargeorgianow.com. You can also download our app from the App Store or the Google Play Store. And to stay up to date on our content across all our platforms, follow us on Instagram at Hear Georgia Now and Facebook at Georgia Now. I'm Jenna Eason.